It looks like we have some folks here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually kind of take a pause really briefly. You might actually, on the recording, I'll actually zoom through this, but for right now, if you're joining me live, um, you'll just, I'll ask if you can bear. What's going on? How are y'all doing today? I hope everybody is doing well. Um, This is the first in our weekly YouTube live series. So every week I actually come to you um, with a lesson. Sometimes it's a lesson, sometimes it's just holding space for any questions that you all may have in regards to your first writing assignments. Sometimes I'll actually come with a special guest. Um, excuse me. Um, and other times, I'm just here to hold space so that way we can kick it. We can actually just kind of connect, chop it up back and forth. Um, I like to hold these YouTube lives, these live YouTube sessions in the evening time after presumably and hopefully, more hopeful than presumable, everyone is off of work. And I say hopeful because everybody has different work schedules. So, but fear not, fret not. If you find yourselves at work, you can certainly, if your job permits it, if the space permits it, and you have like a little earbud or something like that, you could always pop me in your earbud and just kind of give a listen, and then go back and actually watch the recording, which I always make available under our YouTube live schedule. So, let me actually should have. What are those ingredients? Let's take a look at the assignment itself. I'm going to scroll right on down to what this essay should include. This is your basic menu of ingredients that should go into every single memoir. In other words, folks, let me be very clear. This is what I shall be grading you on. Okay. On the development, not just the inclusion, right? You can include these things and they could be done very poorly. I am not going to reward or evaluate essays or narratives that are actually written with these things here included, but that are not developed well. I am evaluating how well it is that you develop these techniques here, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what these ingredients are, right? Let's first and foremost go over them. So, first and foremost, and this is not necessarily in a chronological or a particular order in which we should actually see these things. Let me double check on my YouTube stream, make sure that I don't have any questions in the chat. These are not necessarily things that you should see first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. No, this is not that kind of list here, right? This is just quite simply an ingredients list that should include or that covers what should be included in the essay itself. First and foremost, all essays, all narratives should include a central idea. This should be displayed somewhere within the first paragraph, particularly in the last sentence of the first paragraph. I should see what the main idea, or in other words, what the central idea is defined as, right? The universal ideal or lesson that you discovered through this particular experience. I should be able to see that in the last sentence of the first paragraph, okay? Make it as clear and concise as possible. You only need to have it, you only need to write it as one sentence, okay? That's one. Two, every single, see, this is what I mean by it's not chronological, it's not sequential, right? This is not in any particular order because ostensibly, I should see a title before I see your central idea. But suffice it to say that a central idea is also connected to the to a title, right? The central idea is connected to the title. They're like brother and sisters, right? Like maybe a year apart, maybe like 10 months apart, okay? But a central idea is the more elongated version of its shorter brother or sister. Its shorter brother or sister, not necessarily older or younger, but its shorter brother or sister is known as the title. The title summarizes the narrative's central idea and I want to actually kind of see, right, how well it is that you could develop it within 3 to 5 words, right? That's like a little sweet spot. Now, that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. However, if you're like myself, especially as a young writer, right, and you need kind of directions, you need some clear guidelines, some boundaries, some instructions, then what you would want to actually kind of shoot for is a around about 3 to 5 words that are centered at the top of the narrative, no bold, plain text only, not multiple spaced, only double spaced, not don't hit any extra spaces at all. You want it to actually flow within the framework of the spacing that's already excuse me, that you will establish throughout the entire narrative. And I'll show you all how to actually format. This is a formatting um, point that I want you all to actually consider here, right? In addition, it should only be 12-point font. No bold, no italics, only 12-point font, plain text only. 3 to 5 words centered, right? Center aligned and at the top of the narrative underneath your heading, all right? Next, you should also, too, this essay should include dialogue, which occurs as a verbal exchange between two characters. All right. So typically, what you have is another character, your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your auntie, a friend, a teacher, a mentor, whoever it is who kind of pops up in your narrative, who's central to recalling and recounting a time in your life where you got confronted with a challenge that you had to overcome, right? Whoever's central and germane to that story, right? You want to actually show us rather than tell us what happened, right? One of the key techniques that you could use in order to show, this actually comes directly from the narrative structure PowerPoint. One of the key techniques you could use to show your readers what happened and more specifically what was said is dialogue, right? Dialogue has a way of showing your characters, or excuse me, showing your readers what was said. As opposed to, let me give you an example, right? I walked to the store and I saw the store owner, and the store owner told me that I had to hurry up, buy my things, and then get out of here. So that way, I wouldn't actually get, that way he wouldn't call the police on me. Right. Before I actually knew it, I was really focused on, hurrying up. I was so angry. I was so upset that, I kicked over the comic book stand and said, here, well, you hurry up and pick this up. And then I walked out, right? That's an example of me telling you, right, what happened, right? I also told you what was said, right? Now, that does not do the same kind of work or the same kind of job as it would if I were to show you step by step, if I were to actually use vivid descriptions and language in order to bring you into the moment of the experience. Now, let's use this example here by contrast. Now, I'll show you, right? So as I walked into the liquor store at the corner of my grandmother's house, I saw Mr. Kim, the shop owner, who knew me ever since I was a kid. Has known my mom, known my family, right? Very familiar with me. But today seemed like it was kind of odd. It was kind of different from every other time that we've interacted before. As I walked in, I said, quote, "Hey, Mr. Kim, what's going on?" He responded, "Hurry up and buy." I looked at him. I said, "Damn, Mr. Kim, why are you tripping on me like that? Man, I come in here all the time. Why are you trying to hurry up and rush me out of here?" So I don't want any trouble. I just want you to hurry up and buy so that way you can get on out of here. Clearly, I could tell that Mr. Kim has probably had a bad day, but I also don't really take kindly to people telling me what to do. So I responded back, "Well, you know what, man? If you're gonna have an attitude like that, then you know what? Boom!" I knock over the comic book stand and I walk out. And as I walk out, I say to him, "Huh, you pick this up and you hurry up." As I left, I could hear the curses coming out of Mr. Kim's mouth. And I felt immediately horrible because he knows my mom, he knows my grandmother, he knows my family. For so many years, I don't know what might have set him off or triggered him to talk to me like that. See, that's the difference, right, between showing versus telling. When I show somebody something, I'm bringing them into the action. I'm also bringing them into my state of mind as I'm experiencing it. And that is one of the major key techniques of a critical memoir, right? Which is demonstrated most clearly through dialogue. The other kind of sister twin to dialogue, right? So if dialogue shows what was said, then the sister twin, I'm going to skip over one element, right? The sister twin of it, which shows what happened, is action, right? And I gave an example of kind of both, right? Action refers to the exciting, notable activity that moves the story along its plot, right? So boom, right, when I'm using kind of sound effects, right, or when I'm describing the actions of something, right, boom, I knock the comic book stand over, right, and then I say to him, no, you come and pick this up, and you hurry up and pick it up, right. That helps to show what I've said and also what I did, right. Action and dialogue go hand in hand, especially in the narrative format. Okay, now in action, I mentioned another key vocabulary word, which is referred to as plot. Plot refers to the specific sequence in which a story takes place based on what happened, action, and two, what was said, dialogue. I know this looks a little wonky right here. I'm going to try to go back and fix that. So that way it's not so confusing. All right, so this is actually what we refer to as plot and organization. Okay, plot refers to the overall structure, right? That houses, right, or that frames what happened first, what happened second, what happened third, what happened fourth, fifth, and sixth. And we're going to actually dive into our plot structure. We're going to use plot structure as a way to provide us with a guideline for how to write our outline. Okay, more to come on that in just a second. Next, the last three things that we need to actually see in this essay, the last three basic ingredients of every single memoir, every single narrative. It doesn't matter if you've seen a narrative in a magazine. It doesn't matter if you've seen a narrative in a comic book. It doesn't matter if you've seen a narrative on a blog. It doesn't matter if you've seen a narrative on the movie screen, TV screen, books, film, music, movie. All narratives have these basic core ingredients. The last three of which include analysis, right, which helps to answer the how and the why questions that actually arise throughout the plot, right? So when something occurs, right, when you show your reader something that happened, right, what is going to pop up is in the reader's mind's eye is, well, how did that occur, right? Or how did you arrive at this point? And also the question of why, right? Well, why did the reader is going to think to themselves, right? Why did this author feel like that? Right? Your analysis, which typically comes in the conclusion, right? Not necessarily, not throughout the entire essay. You want to actually save it for the conclusion, okay? And this here is just a specific kind of feature that helps to maintain organization and clarity throughout first year writing students' essays, okay? Right now, if you're like a professional writer, then there are different conventions that you could kind of break, remold, and reform, right? Where you're providing an analysis all the way throughout. But we're not in the professional writing space or stage. We're in the first year college level student writing phase. So I want us to actually kind of practice organization, okay? And pulling our ideas together in these very clear cut, sequenced ideas or clear cut sequence of events, right? Where the analysis comes in the conclusion, right? Where you're able to answer all the questions of how and why that might pop up throughout your narrative, right? If there's any idea or ideas that you want to actually emphasize or kind of re-stress or like kind of re-explain to your readers, and the conclusion is the place where you want to actually do that, because that's the part, that's the last thing that your readers are going to read that leaves a lasting impression with them. Next. Imagery. Imagery actually is developed and occurs throughout the entire narrative itself. From the opening sentences, you need to always show your readers rather than tell them, right? Imagery is another technique right alongside of action and dialogue. As a matter of fact, action and dialogue work in the service of producing images in the reader's mind's eye. Sometimes they might actually use hyperbole. Sometimes imagery is actually demonstrated through metaphors or similes. Any kind of imaginative language or figurative language, all those techniques that you may have actually learned, right? Simile, metonymy, you know, tone, right? Voice, all these kind of techniques that we've learned or at least heard about ever since we were in high school, right? Imagery takes any one of those techniques and it uses it in order to create a vision, a sensory detail, something that the reader can feel, right? Either emotionally or physically, right? Feeling, right? It uses sensory detail like sight to help the reader kind of visualize, right, in a clear and detailed manner what happened to help your reader to see what happened, right? It'll utilize ideas or excuse me, sensory details like sound, so that way the reader can actually hear what's happening as you're moving, right? Or what's happening that's going on around you. What are you listening to, right? It utilizes sensory detail like taste so that readers can actually experience what it is that you're experiencing at the time. And it also uses sensory details like feel, sight, sound, taste. What's the other one? Oh no, your friendly neighborhood professor is having a brain fart. Quick, somebody in the chat. What's the last five senses? Sight, taste, smell. Did I say smell? I didn't say smell. I didn't say smell. It's smell. We landed the plane eventually, folks. All right. Right. So you want to be able to, excuse me, imagery also uses sensory level detail like smell as well. Right. So that way the reader can also experience what it is that what's going on around them. The reader can actually experience the environment in which the reader, excuse me, in which the author is situated in, right? Now, it's not that the reader has to, excuse me, the writer has to use all of these sensory details at all times throughout the entire essay, right? No, but you want to use it and you want to use all of these techniques here strategically. You want to be very conscious and you want to be very intentional. You want to be very deliberate and you want to be very selective about when you employ any one of these techniques, okay? Most importantly, let me give you a major tip, right? A DJ Khaled major key alert. You don't want to start off writing your essay utilizing these techniques. You want to start off writing your essay, period. You just want to write, right? You want to write. And that's the main thing. If you can get your essay started, if you can get your critical memoir started, that's the best way to begin. Okay. Now, in the previous video that I posted up earlier this week, in the video tutorial for how to compose an outline, I talked to you all. I framed that video in the concept of of the writing process. The writing process is a sequence of changes that occurs throughout a writing project, right? That an author undergoes throughout an entire piece, right? So it's a series of changes that's constantly ongoing as they're writing. And one of the first things that I talked about and discussed in that video, specifically the first step of the writing process, right? It begins with planning and shaping, so a kind of freestyle, right? And then it moves on to drafting, right? Now, there's a difference. Go back and rewatch that video. I'll kind of summarize it right here and right now for the purpose of this video, but go back for further explanation and rewatch that video if you, in order to kind of catch the reference here. But in order to get your essay started, you need to start writing. One of the best ways, most effective ways that I found to help to get my students started writing, right, to get over the most difficult part of any writing assignment, right? It's getting started by writing a freestyle. Excuse me, actually, it's getting started by writing an outline, right? And an outline, kind of similar to some of the other elements of planning and shaping, is a kind of non-conceptual but yet organized sequence of ideas that pop up, right, in your narrative. Now, how do you begin writing an outline? Let's dive in. Let's take a look. So what we want to see here is if we scroll on up to not necessarily the top. I'm just at the top of the writing assignment itself, right? But if you scroll up to this section here, where you have this navigational plane, you can actually see that there's in the second column on the right, organizing a link that'll lead you to a tool for organizing your narrative memoir. Now let's click that. Okay. This is the first step for how to get started with organizing your narrative, for writing an outline for your narrative. This is the very same tool that you'll find at the end of the narrative PowerPoint essay, right? The graphic organizer for a narrative. Now, in this tool, you have at least 4 major bubbles over here to the right, which indicate the major sections of your essay, right? So section number 1 is actually not even really fully a section, it's the title, right? So absolutely, yes, every single time you write anything in my class, I don't care if it's for a discussion board, I don't care if it's for a dialectical journal, I don't care if it's for the formal writing assignments, everything needs a title. And the title of the assignment, let me tell you something, I am verbalizing this to you on this recorded live stream, folks. Do not, I repeat, do not use the title of the assignment, critical memoir, or writing assignment number 1, critical memoir. Do not use that as your title. That is not a title. That is the title of the assignment. That's the title of the assignment prompt. That's not a title for your essay. Remember, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, a title should be a 3 to 5 sentence, a 3 to 5 word summary of your central idea, not sentence, but a 3 to 5 word summary of your main central idea. Okay, that's what we want to see first. Now, from there, we have 3 major sections of this essay. So what that means here is that I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second. Open up. Open up some stuff here. All right. Okay. Let me actually share another video. Now, I wonder if I'll be able to share this. Let me see. I want to share. Share my entire screen. Can I share my entire screen? Okay. Hopefully you can see this and my screen is not blank. If it's blank, I'm sorry. Let me just describe what it is that I'm looking at in case the screen is blank. Actually, you know what? I want to change this. Let me change it. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, so let me see. Let me share a window. Okay, all right. This might actually work a lot better. There we go. Okay, so it looks like you can see what I see. Excellente. Okay, folks, so as I mentioned, yes, you need a title right here, right? So let's go ahead on and let's do a title. Let's say I'm just going to write fire before the doorway. Okay, so there's my title. Notice how I have my heading up here. You should actually, your alarm should be blaring. There's something missing up here, right? I'm going to double click in the header space, and I need to actually include my header. So I'm going to first go to align right under my home, I'm using Microsoft Word, by the way. Same thing also works for Google Docs if you use Google Docs too as well. I would not recommend using Pages. I would certainly go and type in on Google Microsoft Word student version for free. Okay. And go use the online version of Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Okay. So I'm going to type in my last name, Cagnolati. And if you notice here, right, this font is actually different from the font below. So I want to change that to Times New Roman, make sure that it's 12-point font Times New Roman. And then I'm going to go to Insert, Page Number, make sure that it's aligned right, show the number on the first page, and boom. Now, if you notice that number, even its font is different. So I need to change that to Times New Roman as well. Okay. So here we have our header in the upper right-hand corner. Now, I don't know why it uses this much space here. Huh. You know why? Probably because of this. There we go. Okay, calculating one. Doesn't need to be that close. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so here you see you're going to put the student's last name up here in the upper right-hand corner, and then, of course, followed by the page number in specifically the way that I showed you. Next, you're going to go over here to the left. You're going to write your first name, first and last name. You're going to write your professor's last name, right? Make sure to spell it correctly. You're going to write your class and your section number, and then the date in ascending order. Now, if you notice here, there's no extra spaces, right? This is all double spaced all the way up until this point right here, right? So as you can see, I'm trying to click just below and it's not clicking because it's double spaced. Now, if you look down here, this is not double spaced, okay? So in order to change that, I can highlight it and then right click, go down to paragraph. When I see paragraph, I want to change this after space to 0. And then I want to also select the box that says don't add space between paragraphs of the same style. Check that box. And I'm going to change the line spacing to double. And it should look like this. All right. So if I'm writing my central idea, right? Now, my central idea is, let me go back to my story. Go here to modules. Personal history statement. It's the handout. Right. So the central idea of my story is that the presence of police on our campus suggested that as predominantly Black and brown student population, we were considered to be a threat and that our educational environment, as well as us, as well as our bodies, needed to be contained, policed, and restricted. Right. So that's my central idea. I want to make sure, right, as I'm writing this. So let's just imagine that I'm actually building this kind of from scratch. Okay. I'm using elements from my narrative that I had already shared with you all to demonstrate how to put together this outline. Okay. So here, right, I have my central idea, right? The presence of police on our campus suggested that as predominantly Black and brown student population, we were a threat and that our educational environment, as well as our bodies, needed to be contained, policed, and restricted. Okay. So this central idea here communicates so much kind of in it, right? Um, but the main thing is our educational environments became prisons, right? I'm reading underneath the subtext here. And that we, in our own educational environment, by people who were present in an educational setting, saw us as a threat or somebody, whoever set the rules in place for my school to have a sheriff station upstairs, whoever set those rules there to be in place, they saw our bodies, us, my classmates, they saw us as a kind of criminal threat, or at least the potential for criminal threat, right? So I'm going to tell my story all about that experience, right? And that challenge. In a the other thing that's being communicated here in a metaphorical way is that the police being on our campus, actually being just outside of our campus, every single time that we actually arrived from at our bus drop off, there were police that were in front of our campus doors, and that was the fire before the doorway. They were always packing what we call, right, packing heat, meaning that they had shotguns that were actually hoisted on their shoulders, right? And many of them, for many of my classmates, that kind of signaled danger. So what I want to actually do here is, if I'm moving through the outline portion, right, I have the intro, right, which I need to actually kind of break down. I have background. I have the setting. I have to establish the, let me see, what else was it now? Background setting, introduction to the conflict. Background setting, introduction to the conflict. Hold on 1 second. Okay, there we go. Background setting, introduction to conflict. And then central idea. Now you can see each one of these as like subsections within this larger intro here, okay? Right, so for my intro, I want to actually introduce people to the contentious presence of police on our high school campus. As soon as we arrive from our bus drop off. Now for the background, right? Students come from the surrounding neighborhoods, right? I myself was bused from LA. Whoops. Actually, you know, it'll work better if I say, right? I grew up in Los Angeles and was born, and was bused to Compton, Willowbrook area to attend King True Medical Magnet, right? Okay. This is what I'm trying to actually get you all to begin to develop in your discussion board, in your discussion boards. Okay. So in your discussion boards, these are what you call kind of like sentence outlines, right? So I'm just writing just a sentence, right? Setting Los Angeles, Compton, Watts, borderline. Across the street from a major landmark, King Hospital. Now, the intro to the conflict comes into play when I describe how police stood at the doorway every morning before we entered school with shotguns hoisted and tactics bag. Our central idea. Okay. Now for the central idea, oh, I already have it up here. Right? So the central idea, this is the reason why you always want to put it up there at the top. Right? So that way you don't have to actually come back to it later and you can work it directly into your outline. Okay. All right. So the central idea. The presence of police on our campus suggested that as predominantly Black and brown student population, we were threatened that our educational environment as well as our bodies needed to be contained, policed, and restricted. Right? Boom. That's how I create my introduction. Now, here's the thing. Next step is that I have to actually do the next section in that outline, right? So the next section in that outline body paragraphs. And here, my subsections are going to be event number 1 with action and dialogue, event number 2 with action and dialogue, event number 3 with, say it with me now, and event number 4, which should be the ultimate climax, right? That is to say, the highest point of tension between, in this case, for me, in my story, right, the antagonists are not only the police, right, or the sheriff specifically, right? It's not only the sheriffs, but rather it's the kind of thinking that suggests that our very bodies need to be policed. Anybody who believes, that could be teachers, that could be administrators, that could be counselors, and oftentimes it was all 3 plus the police, right, or plus some sheriffs, right, plus some of our security guards or school resource officers who believed, actually really no, it was to a lesser degree, it was to a gravely lesser degree. Our school resource officers were actually the quote unquote the cool ones, right, the ones who kind of would always have a conversation, would always sit down and chop it up and talk with us, even especially like if we were in trouble. And oftentimes, right, they could actually talk to some of the hardest head kids in the school and kind of get them out of trouble. Not so much get them out of trouble, but like talk them into doing the right thing. Make it so that way they kind of reduce the amount of time that they spent outside of class in the principal's office, right? So the school resource officers weren't necessarily individuals who kind of demonstrated that kind of thinking, but rather sometimes the counselors, sometimes the teachers, sometimes the sheriff, sometimes the administrator, sometimes a variety of different folks who ended up kind of working on the campus. Right, they had love for us, but they also too just kind of trafficked in the idea or the belief that we needed to be policed, or that we were somehow wild, or that we were somehow just all over the place. And that was not what we needed. What we needed were educators, right? And all of those people who I mentioned were educators, right? What we needed were educators who taught us how to think, who taught us how to engage, who taught us how to think critically while making connections between the words that we were reading in the classroom and the world that we were living in outside. That's what we needed. And my story talks about a teacher who actually did that. So that's exactly what I'm going to actually tell in my sequence of events. I'm going to tell the order and sequence of events where event number one occurs that leads to event number two, which also leads to event number three, and ultimately event number four. Right now, event number one actually looks at me getting in some trouble, right? Also, too, some of my friends getting in trouble. It looks at some of my friends getting into trouble. It looks at us getting caught up in the tardy sweep, which was basically like the holding cell for folks who came in late, right? It also looked at excuse me. So, right, event number one kind of tells that story of how me and my friends got in trouble, right? Event number two kind of starts to change it a little bit. It talks about how we were still getting into trouble, but rather that we got introduced to a teacher whose classroom we could actually sneak off into instead of getting caught in the tardy sweep because we were ditching class. A teacher opened up the classroom to us and allowed us to go on in. Event number three talks about what we did in that classroom, how we engaged in dialogue and critical reflection, and how we used hip hop, song lyrics, and also to the lives of the artists who wrote those song lyrics as a kind of critical text for us to begin evaluating the world and the social problems that we were bearing witness to on a daily basis in our home environments. And it also details the connections that I made with other students in the classroom. Now, the main thing that I'm doing is I'm not telling people anything. Right? I'm showing them, right, what happened and what was said. I'm only using action and dialogue in the sequence of events in order to move the story right along. Here, it's helpful if you think about these events as paragraphs, right? So event number one is your first body paragraph. Event number two, second body paragraph. Event number three, third body paragraph, so on, right? And I'm using action and dialogue to convey and move that story right along its plot points. Okay. Then lastly, but not leastly, I want to actually move through the conclusion. Okay. Right. And that's where I begin to write my overall analysis, which is what it is that you all see in those last two paragraphs, right? The conclusion. That's where I'm actually resolving the story, resolving everything that happened. And I'm actually trying to provide my overall assessment of what that time frame meant to me and what I discovered, what I learned about myself, and how it is, what I learned about what I learned about myself in overcoming the challenge of being intimidated not by bullies, not by students, not by gang members, but by the very educators who roamed about throughout the hallways of the school that I was to get an education at. Boom. There's my conclusion, right? So I'm writing that in my outline format, right? That's all I want to actually write in my outline, right? So here I'm going to have, right, so Roman numeral number 2, background, excuse me, sorry, not background. Body right? I'm going to write event number 1, event number 2, event number 3, and event number 4. Okay. Oops. There we go. And then I've reached my conclusion. Here now, I would write my analysis of a series of events and what I discovered about what I discovered about myself and overcoming those challenges. Next, I'm going to actually write how this experience changed my perspective on my own abilities. And then next, not forgetting about the assignment prompt and the essay that's, the question that's being asked, right? How has this challenge affected your academic achievement, right? How has overcoming this challenge affected my academic achievement? Okay. And then check this out, folks. Here, boom, I have an outline. So here's the thing, right? From here, what I can do is I can start to write my essay. All right. Now, whether you start with the first Roman numeral or capital letter A, and you just start, freestyle writing, right? The first thing that comes to your head, right? What I used to actually do with my students, especially in my face-to-face class, is I would give them, so we would combine two aspects or two techniques of planning and shaping in the writing process. In this case, the outline plus freestyling, right? So I would actually have my students time themselves, get a little timer on your phone, right? 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and for 2 minutes, I would have them actually write on the first capital letter that they see, right? So if it's the background and all they have to go on is students come from the surrounding neighborhoods, right? I grew up in Los Angeles and was bused out to Compton, Willowbrook area to attend King Drew Medical Magnet, right? Then for 2 minutes, I'm writing nothing else except for just on the background. I might actually put some music on and put my timer on, boom, and I'm just going to write the first thing that comes to my head. Don't even worry about making any mistakes. Don't worry about any punctuation. Just keep writing and just write the first thing that comes to your head about your background, right? And then once your timer is up, switch to the next topic. Restart your timer, and then do a 2-minute freestyle on the setting. And you just write everything that you can remember: smell, sight, sound, touch, taste, right? Feeling, all those senses, right? As much as possible, describe everything that you can about the borderline between LA, Compton, Watts, and being across the street from King Hospital, the area or the space known as King Drew Medical Magnet High School. King Drew Medical Magnet High School. Okay. So boom, as soon as my 2 minutes is up, then I'm jumping right on. I'm not worried about making any mistakes. I'm just writing the first thing that comes to my head. Matter of fact, here, this is the first time, let me say it. This is the first time you could be free in your writing. That's why we call it a freestyle. Because freestyle, right? True freedom, especially in writing, does not look as a mistake as something wrong. They look as a mistake. They look at a mistake as an opportunity for new innovation, right? This is what's so significant, so powerful, so compelling about hip hop and freestyle, right? As an art form. It's also, too, the very same technique that you'll find present in jazz music, right? It's called improvisation, okay? Right? Where band members don't worry about the mistakes, right? They just play and they just play to their heart's content, right? Here, we've got a little bit more structure. We're playing for 2 minutes, right? We're just writing the first thing, and don't pick up your pen. Just write. Even if it's the same word over and over, write. Just write, right? And then get all the way through your intro. And then, right, once you get finished with your central idea, right, and you just kind of elaborate on it and do all that stuff, right, you can kind of boom, move. Now you're done, right? Take a break. Take a break for a hot second, right? Breathe. Once you take your breath, then you get right on back to it. Start your timer again. You go right on over here to the body section, major sequence of events, right, in order in which they occur. So boom, you want to freestyle, right? First thing that comes to your head. You're not correcting anything at all up until this point. You're not correcting nothing, right? Not even from the previous section. You're just going to write the first thing that you remember happening, right? Boom, event number one. Right. 2 minutes is up. Boom, event number two. Right. See, this is why you have to actually kind of include these kind of things, right? At least a start or a sentence, right? In each one of these components of subdivisions of your outline here, okay? Because the one sentence, even if it's a question, right? The one sentence gives you a starting place. It gives you a starting point, right? It gives you something to look at and to respond to so you can elaborate, right? See, it's much more difficult for me if I don't write anything right here and I'm just trying to create something off the top of my head. It's much more difficult for me to actually write about event number one if I don't know exactly where I want to start. You see what I'm saying? So you want to actually, when you get to the body section of your essay, right, you want to think, okay, so what happened that led to my self-discovery? What happened to me learning about how I respond? What led to me discovering more about myself in response to this challenge, right? And that's how you want to think about each event and which event you want to include. Okay. So that's going to be all for today. I don't want to actually take up too much of your time, folks. Excuse me. Thank you all so much just for attending your Friendly Neighborhood Professor's YouTube live stream. Hopefully you were able to get something out of this. I will actually post this video here up for you to go back and to watch, for you to go back and to review, to see any of the techniques that I actually used and to use some of the techniques that I used in your own writing and in your own writing process at your leisure. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Once you submit your essays on this Sunday, it will take me about a week to actually get back to you, or rather to provide you all with critical commentary and feedback. So make sure to make sure that if you want to receive any sort of type of feedback, that you see me during office hours for next week. Okay. If you want any feedback prior to, if you don't want to wait until the following week, right, make sure to schedule an office hours appointment with me, and then we can sit down and go over it together. Okay. All right, folks. Well, hopefully you all were able to get something out of today's YouTube live stream. I'm your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag, signing off. Take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great weekend. Peace.